Want to bring in CBS News legal analyst Rikki Klieman. Rikki, thanks so much for being with us. Before we get to Manafort, let's discuss the Kavanaugh situation for a second. I mean,
Sure.
This hinges on events that happened, 30 years ago? At this point, is it simply one person's word against another?
In essence, it's one person's word against two, ultimately, because we have the female who is saying that two males were involved in this event. Of course, the Supreme Court nominee, Brett Kavanaugh, but also Mr. Judge. Now, Mr. Judge, according to the female, Dr. Ross's statement, was that Mr. Judge jumped on the pile, and as a result, the pile of the three of them kind of fell apart, and that she was not ultimately sexually assaulted or raped at that point in time, which is not to say that it lessens her fear as expressed by her. But does it become one person's word against two, one person's word against one? She took a polygraph from a former FBI polygrapher. Does that mean we now have to spread the polygraphs around? Where does it end?
Mm-hmm. So how challenging is it then for these cases that go back decades like this one to gather evidence?
Almost impossible. Unless you have real corroboration. Let's look at the most newsworthy recently, which of course has to do with the Catholic Church and the predatory priests. What had happened, which was astounding in those cases, at least the ones in Pennsylvania, was that there were actually records.
Right.
There was record keeping of moving the priests from parish to parish. And they were detailed records. Ordinarily, if you're looking at an incident that took place 3 years ago, it's hard enough, let alone over 30 years ago, when the only people in the room are the two men and the woman, according to the woman.
Right. So tough. I just want to talk a little bit about our current climate, because as you know, the accusations that Anita Hill made against Clarence Thomas did not prevent him from becoming a Supreme Court justice. Do we live in a different time now? You know, the Me Too movement, will all of this color the way this woman's accusations are treated, as opposed to the way Anita Hill's accusations were treated?
Oh, I would assume so. For those of us of a certain age, we remember precisely where we were when we watched those hearings involving Anita Hill and her accusations against Clarence Thomas. They were riveting. I mean, the country was watching this on TV. At that time, you were also dealing with issues that had not come to the fore publicly, and that it was an atmosphere of sexual harassment. It was statements of sexual harassment. It was not an accusation of attempted sexual assault. So here you have a much more serious accusation, but you're in a climate where now certainly the word of the accuser is the word that has been believed across society in recent months, or since Harvey Weinstein. That was certainly not true at the time of Anita Hill.
Right. It will be interesting to see how that factors into this situation. Now let's move on to Paul Manafort. As you know, he accepted a guilty plea, and he has a deal. How will this now impact Mueller's probe going forward?
Well, Bob Mueller hit the mother lode here. What you have here, first of all, let's look at what he gets. He gets a lot of money. He gets more money in forfeiture, meaning not he, Robert Mueller, but the U.S. Treasury, winds up getting in more money from the four properties of Paul Manafort, plus the life insurance, plus other goods.
Yeah, tell us a little bit, if you would, about the deal. What has he agreed to?
Well, what he's agreed to, as Paula pointed out, is that he has to tell Robert Mueller and his investigators virtually everything. That is, from the beginning of time to the end. There are no limits on his cooperation as to what Mr. Mueller may want to know within Mr. Mueller's purview.
Right.
Now, as a result of his doing that, what else does he have to do? He has to turn over 4 highly valuable pieces of real estate, which will more than pay for the entire Mueller investigation if you had an actual quid pro quo. It actually all goes into the Treasury. But what you wind up with is what does Mr. Mueller want?
Right.
What does the special counsel want?
What areas of information do you think he's most interested in from Manafort?
Well, I think we can start with, obviously, collusion. Which is conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy against the United States, which is one of the things that Mr. Manafort has pled to, but not in the sense of Russian collusion. So we're going to find out at some point, I assume, with a report from Robert Mueller, as to what happened at that Trump Tower meeting, according to Paul Manafort. What kinds of efforts with Paul Manafort's business having to do with years and years involvement in Ukraine, dealing with the pro-Russian Federation? And what did that have to do then with people who may have been communicated with? In fact, we go back to Oleg Deripaska, who is the oligarch that was close to Paul Manafort and wanting to be debriefed about incidents during the Trump campaign. And he, of course, is very close to Vladimir Putin. We go back to the other person who was indicted for intimidating witnesses in this D.C. indictment, Konstantin Klieman. He is also indicted. He's kind of the go-between. Then let's look at, that WikiLeaks dump. All of those DNC emails that were dumped, and Roger Stone.
So
Paul Manafort's the hub of the wheel.
This is a lot of information that Mueller now wants to talk to Manafort about. So this could go on and on. I mean, these are a lot of interviews, a lot of people that he wants to talk to Manafort about. Yes,
and we have to remember this. This deal did not come about because one lawyer walked into the special counsel's office and said, Special Counsel Robert Mueller, I can have Paul Manafort give you information on the following topics, A, B, C, D, and E. I think that we had days, hours of debriefings in order to reach this deal. Yeah. And so that's just the beginning now.
Because essentially there's no hope now for a presidential pardon.
Doesn't matter. Let's say there's hope for a presidential pardon. Why would he do that at this point? I have no idea. But it doesn't matter because Paul Manafort has to continue to cooperate with the special counsel's office, regardless of whether or not he is pardoned. He has no Fifth Amendment privilege.
So, Rikki, now that Paul Manafort is singing, so to speak, and has a lot to sing about, does this mean that Mueller will be less interested in that interview with the president?
Oh, I think he would have always been interested in the interview with the president. I think they're two separate topics. You have to remember that this is an office that has many online prosecutors in that office chosen by Robert Mueller, that they have a division of responsibility. No person in the special counsel's position would want to go forward without the delicious opportunity of being able to sit down with the president, which, of course, most lawyers would say if they were representing President Trump, a sit-down face-to-face will not occur.
That is very likely at this point that that will not happen. But does that mean that Mueller still will have enough without that interview?
We don't know.
Yeah.
It is a leak-proof office.
Right.
No one knows what goes on. You have to consider that last week, while Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump were still singing Paul Manafort's praises for being strong and tough and not folding, that there were already proffers being given for days. The day of the guilty plea, there was not one reporter who went into that guilty plea with any leak of any knowledge that Paul Manafort was actually going to cooperate until the prosecutor used the word cooperation in the courtroom.
Well, far from the Mueller investigation wrapping up, it looks like it's just gaining some steam right now, some very significant steam. Rikki Klieman, thank you so much for coming to see us.